Her cat slept on the same floorboard every night. She pried it up and found a dead man's furnace. Amos Bell, who had survived 12 winters and buried a wife to the cold, told her, "Leave before January or bury one of your children." She had $34, 2 children, and needed 6 cords of wood she could not cut. On January 12, 1888, the temperature dropped 60 degrees in 8 hours, but 4 months earlier, Eliza Brundage Vale had never trusted a dead man's work. She had arrived in late August with 2 children, a milk cow tied to the wagon, and a husband who would be dead within a week. Silas Vale's wagon overturned on the 9th day. The axle caught a prairie dog burro at speed, threw him into the wheel, and the infection set in before anyone could reach a doctor. 2 men she had never met carried him into the cabin wrapped in a quilt. Ruth kept asking whether they could still burn the cottonwood roots stacked by the shed. Owen asked who would fix the barn door before snow. Eliza stood in the doorway and watched them lower her husband onto boards she had never seen before, in a house she had not chosen, on land that would now either feed her children or bury them. The claim was 160 acres of open grassland in northern Nebraska near the Dakota line. Silas had filed 3 years earlier. He had built half a cabin, started a barn, and left the rest for later. Now later had arrived, and later had no man in it. 3 days after the burial, Amos Bell rode up from the south. He was 58 years old, had wintered on the plains for 12 years, buried a wife after a lung fever winter, and lost stock in 2 blizzards. He did not knock. He walked the property with his hands behind his back, counting. "Cabin's 14 by 18, he said. "Drafty. North wall's only half chinked. Barn's 22 feet from the house, no loft worth the name. Gaps at the sill where wind will cut through like a blade." Eliza followed him, saying nothing. "Fuel on hand." He kicked the stack by the shed. "Maybe 1.5 cords. Most of it green cottonwood and twisted root. Burns fast, throws sparks, won't hold heat past midnight." "How much do I need?" 6 cords, minimum, for a winter in a house this poor." He turned and looked at her. "You have $34 after the freight debt and the doctor's bill. Nearest town is 12 miles. Nearest neighbor who might help is 3. Martha Pinn. Martha Pinn has 4 children and a husband who works the line. She cannot spare a cord, let alone 5. Amos Bell stopped walking. The wind moved the grass behind him. "Mrs. Vale, I have seen women try this. I have buried 2 of them. You cannot cut, split, haul, and season 6 cords of wood while also hauling water, minding the children, milking the cow, mending the barn, and keeping yourself fed. The math does not work. What do you suggest? Leave before January. Take the children to Omaha. Find kin. Find work. Abandon the claim. And if I have no kin, if I have no money for passage, if this land is the only thing my children will ever own?" Amos Bell looked at the cabin. He looked at the unfinished barn. He looked at Ruth and Owen standing in the doorway, watching. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "with 2 children and half a woodpile, you will either leave before January or bury one of them here." He rode away without offering help. Eliza did not leave. She could not. The claim was filed. The improvements were made. Walking away meant losing everything Silas had built and everything she had left. There was no family in Ohio who would take her. There was no money for train fare. There was no work in Omaha that would feed 3 mouths and pay rent besides. The escape hatch was closed. She had $34, 2 children, and a deadline measured in snowfall. So she cut wood. She had never swung an axe for fuel in her life. In Ohio, her father had hired men. In Ohio, there had been forests. Here there was grass and wind and scattered cottonwood along creek bottoms 3 miles distant. She walked the children there, left them sitting on a stump, and hacked at deadfall until her hands bled through the cloth she wrapped around them. 1 cord took her 2 weeks. By mid-September, she had added half a cord to her stack. The barn door still hung crooked. The north wall of the cabin still leaked wind. The cow had begun to thin because Eliza could not haul water fast enough to keep her drinking well. And the nights were already cold enough that Owen coughed in his sleep. Martha Pinn came by on a gray afternoon with a jar of preserves and an expression that said she had come to assess, not to help. "Amos told me," Martha said. "He thinks you're staying." I am staying. How? Eliza wiped her hands on her apron. The blisters had opened again. I'll cut more wood. Eliza, Martha set down the preserves. I have 4 children. I know what one woman can do in a day. You cannot cut 5 cords before hard winter. Not while keeping the children alive, not while keeping the cow alive, not while finishing that barn. Then I will cut 4 cords and burn less. You will freeze. I will wear more clothes. Martha Pinn looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the cabin floor, the rough planks Silas had laid without care. You know this house belonged to someone before your husband? Matthias Greeley. Silas bought the claim from the estate. Greeley was strange. Built strange. Dug strange. People said he spent more time underground than above it. What does that mean? I don't know. Nobody does. He froze to death 2 winters ago, lost on the way back from town. Whatever he was building, he never finished explaining it. Martha picked up the preserves again, changed her mind, set them down. I'm telling you this because Amos thinks you'll die here, and I think he might be right. But if Greeley left something useful in this place, you might find it before the snow does. She left without saying what that something might be. The cat found it first. Juniper was a gray mouser Silas had brought from the previous owner, too mean to pet and too useful to discard. Eliza barely noticed the animal most days. But in the second week of October, with frost rhyming the wash basin every morning, she noticed something strange. Juniper slept on the same floorboard every night, not near the stove, not on the children's bed, not on any blanket or warm surface. The cat curled on a single plank near the back wall, between the pantry corner and the door to the barn side, and would not be moved. Eliza thought nothing of it the first night. The second night, she thought the cat was sick. The third night, she knelt to check, and her hand touched the wood. It was warm, not hot, not stove-heated, but soft warm, the way a sun-baked stone holds warmth into evening. She pressed her palm flat and felt a faint upward draft through a crack in the board. Moving air. She sat back on her heels, heart pounding. Moving air meant a void. Moving air in cold weather meant something was generating warmth below the floor. Either the house was built over rot, a fire waiting to happen, or something else was down there. Eliza waited until the children were asleep. Then she took a pry bar from the barn and worked the board loose. Below was a shaft, stone-lined at the throat, maybe 3 feet across, with 2 ladder rungs set into the wall. The air rising from it smelled of earth, lime, old straw, and something animal, not rot, not death, but the musk of a space that had been used and left. She lowered a lantern on a rope. The shaft dropped 8 feet into a crawl passage. The passage ran level toward the barn. Eliza's hands were shaking, not from cold. She went down the next morning. She tied a rope around her waist, looped the other end around Ruth's bedpost, and told Ruth to scream if she heard anything wrong. Then she lowered herself into the shaft, found the rungs, and dropped into the passage below. It was barely high enough to crawl. The walls were packed earth, shored in places with planks and stones. The floor was damp but not wet, and the air was warm. Warmer than the cabin above. Warmer than any October basement had a right to be. She crawled, 12 feet, 20. The passage curved slightly, following what she guessed was the slope of the yard. Ahead, she could see the flicker of her lantern reflecting off something larger, an opening, a chamber. She reached it and stopped breathing. The chamber was 6 feet by 8, stone-faced on one wall, timber braced on the roof. The ceiling was close. She could not stand, but the space felt deliberate, intentional. Above her, she could hear the shifting weight of the milk cow, the scrape of hooves. The barn floor was directly overhead, and in the stone wall there was a vent, a throat packed with old reed matting and clay collars, an airway. Not a crack, not an accident, a designed opening that someone had built to move air from the barn space into this chamber and up through the passage into the cabin. Matthias Greeley had built a heating system. He had dug under his cabin, run a tunnel to a chamber beneath his barn, and designed a way to capture the warmth of his animals and channel it into his home. It was mad. It was brilliant. It was the only reason the floorboard above was warm when everything else was frozen. Eliza sat in the chamber for a long time, listening to the cow move above her, feeling the warmth of the stone wall against her back, and understanding for the first time that she might not have to die here after all. But understanding is not the same as survival. The system was real, but it was broken. The vent throat was clogged with debris and old matting that had never been replaced. The tunnel had collapsed in one section, narrowing the passage to a squeeze. The chamber roof had a crack that let moisture seep through whenever the barn floor got wet, and the whole design was based on assumptions Eliza did not understand. Airflow, pressure, heat retention. She knew what it was supposed to do. She had no idea how to make it do it. Martha Pym came back a week later, and Eliza told her. Martha's face went pale. "You went down there? Alone?" "I tied a rope to the bed." "Eliza, you could have been buried. You could have breathed bad air and never waked up. You could have... I could have frozen to death in January with my children watching. This is better." "It is not better. It is madness." Martha grabbed her arm. "Warmth that comes through dirt comes with damp. Damp brings rot. Rot brings sickness. You will poison your children with barn air and call it survival." "The air's clean. I tested it." "How?" "I brought a candle. It burned steady." "That does not mean—" "Martha." Eliza pulled her arm free. "I have $34. I have 1.5 cords of wood. I have 2 children and no grown man in this house. Amos Bell told me to bury one of them. You told me to find whatever Greeley left behind. I found it. Now I have to make it work." Martha Pym looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "The warmth in that barn comes from the cow. What happens when the cow gets sick? What happens when you cannot feed her? What happens when the whole system depends on an animal you cannot afford to keep alive?" Eliza had no answer. Martha left, and the question stayed. Harlan Pike heard about the tunnel from someone in town. Eliza never learned who. Pike ran the feed and freight office 12 miles south. He had extended Silas credit for lumber and nails, and the debt had not been paid. He had been waiting for Eliza to default, to sell the cow, to abandon the claim, and leave him something to collect against. The tunnel was an insult. He rode up on a morning when Eliza was hauling water from the creek, both children trailing behind her with empty buckets. He did not dismount. "Mrs. Vale." She set down the buckets. "Mr. Pike." "I hear you've been digging." "I've been improving the property." "Improving?" He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "I heard you found some kind of hole, some passage to the barn. You're planning to heat your house with cow dung and wishful thinking." Ruth stepped closer to her mother. Owen stared at the horse. "I'm planning to survive the winter." "No, you're planning to fail in a way that makes people laugh instead of mourn." Pike leaned forward in his saddle. "Your husband owed me $42. The cow is worth maybe $30. The improvements on this claim are worth less than nothing if you die in them. I'm offering you a deal, Mrs. Vale. Sell me the cow now, use the money to buy passage east. I will forgive the remaining debt as charity." "And the claim?" "The claim reverts. I'll file for the improvements." "So you get the cow, the debt forgiven, and the land besides." "I get a live woman in Omaha instead of a dead one in Nebraska. The terms are generous." Eliza picked up the buckets. The water sloshed against her legs. "No." "No?" "The cow stays. The claim stays. I stay." Pike's smile hardened. "Then you'll be heating a grave, Mrs. Vale, and I'll be there to collect what's left when the digging's done." He rode away. Ruth tugged at Eliza's sleeve. "Mama? Is the man coming back?" "Yes," Eliza said. "He'll be back. That's why we have to make this work. August Tollefson found her 2 days later. She was in the tunnel, on her belly, trying to clear a section that had collapsed inward. Dirt kept falling into her eyes. Her shoulders ached from the cramped position. She did not hear him until his voice came down the shaft. "You test for bad air before you dig?" She froze. The voice was old, accented, unfamiliar. I asked a question, Mrs. Vale. Did you test for bad air? Who's there? August Tollefson, Martha Pinn's husband's uncle. She told me what you found. Eliza crawled backward until she could see the shaft. A man's face peered down, weathered and white-bearded, framed by the square of gray sky. I tested with a candle, she said. A candle tells you if there's enough air to breathe. It does not tell you if the air will kill you slowly. He disappeared from the opening. She heard him moving above, then the creak of the ladder rungs. A moment later, he dropped into the tunnel beside her, grunting at the impact. He was 63 years old, thick through the shoulders with hands like shovels. He had come from Norway 40 years ago and spent his life cutting drainage runs, lining root cellars, and banking structures against winters that killed men who did not know the earth. He looked at the tunnel walls. He looked at the shoring. He looked at the collapsed section she had been trying to clear. This is not bad work, he said. Greeley built it. I know who built it. I sold him the lime. Eliza's heart stopped. You knew about this? I knew he was building something underground. I did not know what. Tollefson ran his hand along the stone throat of the vent. Reed matting and clay collars. That is old country work. That is how my father kept root cellars warm in Trondheim. Does it work? It can work. It can also fill your house with damp and your children's lungs with barn fever. He turned to look at her in the lantern light. Martha tells me you are stubborn. She tells me you will not leave. She tells me you have 2 children and no grown man, and a cow that might not last the winter. That's right. Why did you go down here? The cat found warm air. I wanted to know where it came from. You could have asked someone. You could have waited. There was no one to ask. There was no time to wait. August Tollefson studied her face. Then he smiled, just slightly, and turned back to the collapsed section. You dig from the wrong angle, he said. You must cut the sides before you clear the floor. Otherwise, the weight above pushes in. Here, I will show you. He took the short spade from her hands and began to work. Over the next 3 weeks, August Tollefson came every second or third day. He never stayed overnight. He never ate her food. He worked for a few hours, taught her something, and left. The teachings were specific. First, smoke tracing. He burned damp straw at the barn end and showed her how to read air movement by watching where the smoke lingered, reversed, or climbed. The system drew, but weakly. The collapsed section was blocking flow. Second, clay-lime sealing. He taught her to mix clay, sand, lime, and chopped straw into a paste that hardened slowly and sealed cracks without crumbling. The vent throat was full of gaps where the old matting had rotted. She spent 4 nights repacking it by lantern light. Third, fall management. He showed her how to scrape a shallow trough in the tunnel floor, so any water that seeped through would run toward the barn end, not the cabin. Water in the chamber meant rot. Rot meant collapse. The system had to stay dry. Greeley understood warmth, August said one afternoon, watching her pack clay into a seam. He did not understand water. That is why he died. Not the cold, the damp. How do you know? Because I found his body. He had crawled into a snow hollow and could not find his way out. His boots were wet. His coat was wet. The cold finished what the water started. August wiped his hands on his trousers. Dry cold, you can survive. Wet cold kills. By the end of October, the tunnel was clear. The chamber was shored. The vent throat was sealed and fitted with a baffle of split planks that could control airflow. The barn floor above the chamber had been reinforced where the cow had cracked a board, and a small vent had been cut near the cabin stovepipe to give stale air an exit. The system was ready. November brought the first real test. Eliza woke on the 9th to find frost inside the windows and her breath clouding above the blankets. The stove had gone cold in the night. The water bucket had skinned with ice. But the floorboard over the chamber was warm. She pressed her hand to it, then called Ruth over. Ruth knelt and touched the wood, then looked up at her mother with wide eyes. It's warm. The cow kept us warm. The cow is in the barn. I know. The tunnel carries the heat. Ruth looked at the floor as if she had never seen it before. Greeley built magic under the house. No, Greeley built earth and stone and air. August taught me how to make it work. There's no magic, just design. Owen woke coughing, but the cough was looser than it had been. The warmer floor meant warmer air rising through the room. The children had slept in a house that was not killing them. Amos Bell came by that afternoon. He did not knock this time either. He walked to the side of the cabin, looked at the earthen banking Eliza and August had piled against the north wall, looked at the sealed gap where the skirting met the ground, looked at the small vent pipe rising near the chimney. What is this? Improvements. Martha says you've been digging under the house. Martha is right. He stared at her. You are heating this cabin with air from the barn. With air warmed by the barn, the cow and the earth. The system moves warmth from where it's wasted to where it's needed. That is not possible. It is possible. I am standing in it. Amos Bell walked to the hatch in the floor. He knelt, pulled it open, and looked down into the shaft. The air rising from below was noticeably warmer than the cabin air around it. Greeley, he said. Greeley built it. August Tollefson helped me finish it. Tollefson. Bell's voice was flat. The old Norwegian. He knows Earth. He does not know Plains winters. He knows more than you do. Bell's head came up. His eyes were hard. I told you to leave, Mrs. Vale. I told you what would happen if you stayed. You are betting your children's lives on a dead man's contraption and an old immigrant's advice. When January comes, when the real cold comes, this system will fail. The vent will freeze. The damp will rise. Your children will cough blood and you will watch them die because you were too proud to take the train. Then come back in January. See for yourself. He stood. He looked at the hatch. He looked at her. I will, he said, and I will bring a shovel. December passed in preparation. Eliza moved the milk cow to the position directly over the chamber, where her body heat would radiate down into the stone-faced walls. She penned the 3 hens in a makeshift roost beside the cow, adding their small warmth to the total. She banked snow against the barn's windward wall to cut drafts. She kept the hatch closed during the day and open at night, when the cold was worst and the heat was needed most. The system worked. Not perfectly, not easily. Some mornings the vent throat collected moisture and had to be wiped dry. Some nights the airflow weakened when wind shifted the pressure above the barn. But the floor stayed warm. The cabin stayed warmer than it should have been. The stove fire that had once burned 3 armloads of wood overnight now burned 2. Martha Pinn came to visit on Christmas Eve. She brought a cake and suspicion. She walked through the cabin, touched the walls, touched the floor, stood over the hatch with her hands on her hips. It's warm. Yes. The children are well? Owen still coughs, but not worse. Not better, but not worse. Martha knelt and felt the floorboard over the chamber. Her expression shifted. This is real. It was always real. You just did not believe it. I believed it could work. I did not believe it would work for you. What is the difference? Martha stood. The difference is that I know what the plains do to things that work. You have had mild cold. You have had easy snow. Wait for a blizzard. Wait for 40 below. Wait for the wind that buries barns and kills cattle standing up. Then tell me it works. She left the cake and left. January 12th, 1888 dawned mild. Eliza woke to temperatures that felt like early autumn. The snow had softened. The sky was pale gray, featureless, oddly warm. Owen had slept through the night without coughing. Ruth was laughing at something the cat had done. By noon, Owen had a fever. It came fast the way children's fevers do, fine in the morning, flushed by lunch, coughing by mid-afternoon. Eliza put him to bed, wrapped him in blankets, and tried not to panic. Fevers happened. Children recovered. This was not the crisis. The crisis came at 3 o'clock. The wind hit first, not a gust, not a building blow, but a wall of air that slammed into the north side of the cabin hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in minutes, then 20. The sky went from gray to white to nothing at all. Eliza ran to the window and could not see the barn. 22 feet away, and she could not see it. Owen coughed, wet and rattling. Ruth grabbed Eliza's arm. The stove fire guttered as pressure shifted in the chimney, and somewhere outside, in the scream of the wind, Eliza heard the barn door tear loose. She could not go out. No one could go out. The whiteout was complete, the kind of storm that erased the world and dared you to find your way back. Amos Bell's hired boy had been caught in a storm like this once. He had walked in circles until he collapsed. He had lived only because he fell within arm's reach of a fence post. There was no fence between the cabin and the barn. There was only snow and wind and killing cold. "Mama?" Ruth's voice was thin. "The floor is getting cold." Eliza dropped to her knees. The board over the chamber, the board that had stayed warm since October, was cooling. The warmth that had risen all winter was fading. The torn barn door. The wind was cutting through the barn, stealing the cow's heat before it could reach the chamber. The vent throat might be icing. The whole system was failing. Owen coughed again, and this time he did not stop. Eliza made her decision in the space between heartbeats. "Ruth, stay with your brother. Do not open the door. Do not go near the windows. Keep the blankets on him and keep the stove fed. I will be back. Mama, I will be back." She tied a rope around her waist. She tied the other end to the bedpost. She wrapped a scarf around her face, pulled on every layer she owned, and opened the door. The cold hit her like a fist. She could not see. She could not breathe. The wind drove ice crystals into her eyes and stole the heat from her body faster than she could generate it. She had maybe 10 minutes before the cold killed her. She followed the rope to its end, then let go. Blind, deaf, frozen, she walked. She counted steps, 22 feet, 30 steps maybe if she kept her stride short. She counted to 30 and hit nothing. She was lost. The wind screamed, the cold burned. She could not feel her hands. She turned, tried to find the direction she had come from, and felt the rope brush against her leg. She grabbed it. She followed it. She found the cabin wall. She did not go inside. She edged along the wall, feeling with her hands, until she reached the corner. Then she turned and edged along the next wall toward the barn. The barn was attached to the cabin by a shared corner. If she could find that corner, she could find the barn. She found it. The barn door was hanging by one hinge, banging in the wind, letting the blizzard pour through. The cow was bellowing in terror. Snow had drifted 3 feet inside. Eliza grabbed the door. The wind fought her. She pulled, leaning her entire weight against it, and the door would not move. The hinge was bent. The frame was warped. She could not close it. She could not close it, and every second it stayed open, the heat bled out of the barn, and the cold poured into the chamber below, and her children grew colder in a cabin that was supposed to save them. August Tollefson had told her that dry cold could be survived. He had told her that wet cold killed. He had not told her what to do when the cold came for her children, and the only thing standing between them and death was a broken door. She banked the snow. She could not close the door, so she piled snow against it. She scooped with her hands. She could not feel them anymore, and packed drift against the opening until the wind could not cut straight through. It was not a seal. It was not a fix. It was a dam, built by a woman who could not feel her fingers, in a blizzard that wanted to kill her. Then she crawled to the vent. The outer lip was icing. The warm air from the barn was meeting the killing cold of the storm and freezing where they touched. Another hour and the vent would seal itself shut. The system would suffocate. She scraped the ice with her gloved hand. She scraped until the glove tore. She scraped until blood came, freezing on her skin, and the airway stayed open. The cow had stopped bellowing. The barn was quieter with the door blocked, and somewhere beneath the floor, the system was still trying to push warmth toward her children. Eliza followed the wall back to the cabin corner. She followed the rope back to the door. She fell through the doorway and landed on the floor and heard Ruth screaming, "Mama! Mama! Your hands!" She could not feel her hands. The next 6 hours were the longest of her life. Owen's fever climbed. His coughing turned wet, then rattling, then weak. Eliza stripped the blankets from everywhere else in the cabin and piled them over his pallet, directly over the warm boards where the underfloor heat rose most strongly. She opened the hatch halfway to let more warm air through. She tented the blankets to trap the rising warmth around him. The stove fire sank. She did not have enough wood to keep it roaring through the night. She had counted on the underfloor heat to supplement the stove, to stretch her fuel through exactly this kind of emergency. The system had to work. It was working. The floor over the chamber stayed warm while the rest of the cabin turned deadly cold. The water bucket by the door froze solid. The water bucket near the hatch stayed liquid. At midnight, August Tollefson arrived. She did not hear him knock. She did not know he had come until she heard him banging snow from his boots inside the door. He was covered in ice. His beard was white. He had walked 3 miles through the blizzard because Martha had told him where Eliza lived, and Martha had told him the widow's children would die if no one checked on them. "The vent," Eliza said. Her voice was raw. "The outer vent. It keeps icing." "I know. I cleared it. I cleared it twice on the walk here." He looked at her hands, wrapped in torn cloth and blood-stained. "You went out." "The barn door broke." "I saw. The banking saved you. Another hour and the cow would have frozen." He knelt beside Owen, felt the child's forehead, listened to his breathing. "The fever is high but steady. He is not drowning." He was worse an hour ago. The warmth helped. "Keep him over the heated floor. Keep the hatch open. The barn has less wind now. The system will hold." "You cannot stay." "I am staying. We will trade off clearing the outer vent. The storm will not last forever." It lasted until dawn. When the light came, the world was white and still and deadly quiet. Eliza opened the door and saw a drift that reached the eaves. The temperature had dropped 60 degrees in 8 hours. The storm had buried half the county, and somewhere in the silence, she could hear nothing, no wind, no animals, no human voices. Just the creak of the cabin settling and the soft breathing of her children behind her. Owen was alive. His fever had broken sometime in the night. His coughing had eased. He had slept through the worst of it, wrapped in blankets over a floor that should have been ice cold, but was not. Ruth was alive. The cat was alive. The cow was alive, stamping and bellowing in the barn, ready to be milked. August Tollefson stood in the doorway beside her, looking out at the destruction, and said nothing. They had survived. The dead man's system had held, and Amos Bell was walking up through the snow with a shovel in his hand. He stopped 10 feet from the cabin. He looked at the door standing open. He looked at August. He looked at Eliza. "I came to dig," he said. "We don't need digging?" "No." He looked at the hatch in the floor, still half open, warm air rising through it in visible waves. "No, I suppose you don't." He stood there for a long moment, the shovel hanging at his side, the snow creaking under his boots. Then he said the words she had waited 4 months to hear. "I told you to leave, Mrs. Vale. I told you what would happen. I was wrong." He turned and walked back through the snow. The system had worked, the innovation had held, and the first skeptic had fallen. But winter was not over. And the next test was already coming. The blizzard had killed 17 people across the county. Eliza learned this 3 days later, when the roads opened enough for news to travel. 17 dead, farmers caught between house and barn, children lost walking home from school, a mail carrier frozen in his seat. The storm had come too fast and stayed too long, and the people who survived were the ones who had not gone outside, or the ones who had not needed to. Word spread the way. Word always spreads in small places, through women at the general store, through men at the smithy, through children who repeated what their parents said at supper. The widow Vale had survived. The widow Vale's children had survived. The widow Vale had some kind of tunnel under her house that kept her warm when everyone else was burning furniture. Martha Pym arrived on the 5th day after the storm. She did not bring preserves this time. She brought questions. "Show me." Eliza led her to the hatch. She opened it. The warm air rose in visible currents, fogging Martha's spectacles. "How?" "The chamber beneath the barn captures warmth from the cow. The tunnel carries it here. The vent controls the flow." "I said that air from the barn would bring sickness." "You did. Owen is well?" "Owen is playing in the snow. His cough is better than it was before the storm." Martha knelt and put her hand over the opening. She held it there for a long moment. When she looked up, her expression had changed. "I want to see the chamber." They went down together, Martha first, Eliza behind with the lantern. Martha crawled through the tunnel without complaint, though her skirts caught on the shoring twice. When she reached the chamber, she sat back on her heels and looked at the stone-faced wall, the vent throat, the timber bracing overhead. "Greeley built this." "Greeley started it. August Tollefson helped me finish it." "August?" Martha touched the clay ceiling around the vent. "This is his work. I recognize the mix. He taught me how to make it." "He taught you." Martha turned to look at her in the lantern light. "Eliza, I have known August Tollefson for 11 years. He does not teach. He builds, and he leaves, and he does not explain what he has done. He certainly does not teach women. He taught me." "Why?" Eliza thought about it. She thought about the first day, when August had dropped into the tunnel and asked about bad air. She thought about the way he had watched her work before correcting her. She thought about the smoke tracing, the clay mixing, the fall management. "Because I noticed the warmth before I dug. Because I tested for air before I crawled. Because I asked the right questions." Martha was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I need one of these." "What?" "A chamber, a tunnel, something like this." Martha's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "My youngest nearly died in the storm, Eliza. We ran out of wood on the second night. My husband burned a chair. He burned part of the pantry shelf. If the storm had lasted another day, we would have burned the beds." "I can show you what to build." "Will it work? In my house? With my barn?" "I don't know. Every house is different." "Every barn is different, but the principles are the same. Capture warmth where it's wasted, move it where it's needed. Control the flow." Martha reached out and gripped Eliza's arm, the same arm she had grabbed months ago, warning her about damp and sickness. "Teach me," she said. "Teach me the way August taught you." Within 2 weeks, 3 families had asked to see the system. Within a month, 5 had asked for help building their own. Eliza did not charge. She did not hoard. She walked to neighboring claims with her children in tow and showed people what she had learned: where to dig, how to shore, what to seal, where to vent. She carried August's teachings the way she carried water, carefully, without spilling, making sure every drop reached where it was needed. The results were not always the same. The Lindgren place had a barn too far from the house. They built a shorter passage to an attached shed instead, capturing heat from penned sheep. The Carver place had no cellar at all. They dug a simple warming pit beneath the main room and vented it through a modified chimney base. Each version was different. Each version worked. Amos Bell came back in February. He did not come to apologize again. He came to watch. Eliza was showing Martha's husband how to trace smoke through a half-finished passage when Bell's shadow fell across the opening. She looked up to find him standing at the edge of the dig, arms crossed, face unreadable. "You're spreading this." "I'm teaching it." "To people who don't understand what they're building." "To people who almost froze to death in January." Eliza climbed out of the passage and faced him. "You told me I would bury one of my children. You were wrong. Now I'm making sure other mothers don't have to hear the same prediction. And if one of these systems fails, if someone's child dies because they trusted your tunnel instead of cutting more wood, then I will have failed, but at least I will have tried." She wiped dirt from her hands. What did you try, Amos? What did you do during the storm besides wait for me to die? He had no answer. Harlan Pike did not wait. He attacked. The rumors started in late February. The widow was building dangerous contraptions. The widow was teaching people to breathe barn air. The widow's system had only worked because of luck, and the luck would run out. Pike told anyone who would listen that Greeley had died for a reason, that the man's underground obsession had been madness, and the widow was spreading that madness across the county. Cow breath heating, Pike called it at the feed store. Grave digging for warmth. Wait until one of those tunnels collapses on a child. Wait until the damp sets in and the lung fever starts. Then we'll see who's laughing. The words got back to Eliza within a day. She found Pike at his office the following morning before the store opened, before anyone else could witness. He was counting inventory when she walked in. Mrs. Vale? His voice was cold. Come to pay your husband's debt? I came to ask you a question. Ask. Why do you want me to fail? Pike set down his ledger. He looked at her the way he might look at a horse he was considering buying, assessing value, calculating cost. I don't want you to fail, Mrs. Vale. I expect you to fail. There's a difference. You're spreading lies about my work. I'm spreading warnings. Your system is untested. Your method is unproven. And you are teaching people to gamble their families on something a dead man built in a hole. 17 people died in the blizzard. My children did not. That's proof enough. One storm is not proof. One winter is not proof. Pike leaned forward. I have lived on these plains for 14 years. I've seen every kind of scheme, every kind of shortcut, every kind of clever idea that was going to change everything. They all fail. The plains break them. The cold breaks them. The people who trust them die, and the people who sold them the idea move on to somewhere warmer. I'm not selling anything. I'm teaching for free. That's worse. Charity makes people trust you. Trust makes them stop thinking. Pike picked up his ledger again. Your husband owed me $42, Mrs. Vale. I'm still waiting to collect. When your tunnel fails, and it will fail, I will be there. Just like I said. Eliza walked out without paying the debt. She had no money to pay it. But more than that, she had no intention of giving Pike the satisfaction spring came slowly, and with it, new problems. The thaw started in late March, earlier than usual, warmer than expected. Snow that had piled for months began to melt. Creek beds that had been frozen solid started to flow, and water that had nowhere to go began to seep into places it did not belong. The Lindgren Passage flooded first. Eric Lindgren came to Eliza's cabin on a morning when the mud was ankle deep, his face white with panic. The tunnel is filling. Water is coming through the walls. My wife says the whole thing will collapse. Eliza grabbed her tools and followed him. The passage was not collapsing, not yet, but water was seeping through the earthen walls faster than the drainage trough could carry it away. The floor was slick. The air smelled of wet soil and rot. Another week of this, and the shoring would give way. You built the trough too shallow, Eliza said, and you angled it wrong. The water should run toward the barn, not pool in the middle. August Tollefson told me to angle it toward the house. August told you to angle it toward the low end. He meant the barn. Your barn sits lower than your house. Lindgren stared at her. How do you know that? Because I asked him. Because I watched him work. Because I listened. Eliza knelt and examined the trough. This can be fixed, but you need to dig it deeper and extend it past the chamber. The water has to have somewhere to go. They worked for 3 days. Eliza showed Lindgren how to cut a deeper channel, how to line it with gravel for faster drainage, how to angle the fall so water moved instead of pooled. By the time they finished, the seepage had slowed to a trickle, and the passage was holding, but Pike heard about it. The widow's tunnel flooded, he announced at the store. First warm spell, and it filled with water. That's what happens when you trust a woman who learned engineering from a dead Norwegian bachelor. The word spread. 3 families who had planned to dig their own passages decided to wait. 2 families who had already started abandoned the work. Martha Pinn found Eliza at the creek, hauling water, and delivered the news. They're scared. Pike has them convinced your system only works in cold weather. The system works in all weather. The Lindgren Passage flooded because Lindgren made a mistake. I know that. You know that. But Pike doesn't have to be right. He just has to make people doubt. Eliza set down the bucket. The water sloshed over the edge, soaking her boots. She was tired. Tired of hauling. Tired of teaching. Tired of defending something that worked against people who wanted it to fail. Then I have to prove him wrong again. How? By showing them a system that doesn't flood. By fixing the ones that do. By being right so many times that Pike runs out of lies to tell. Martha looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled, a small, hard smile that had nothing warm in it. That's what August would say. August taught me well. August Tollefson did not see the spring. He had been coughing since February, a deep, wet cough that rattled in his chest and left him breathless after any exertion. Martha said it was the walk through the blizzard that had done it. 3 miles in killing cold, clearing ice from the vent, sleeping on Eliza's floor with wet boots. He had saved her children. The cost had been his lungs. Eliza visited him in March, when the roads were passable, but the man was not. He lay in Martha's back room, propped on pillows, too weak to sit up without help. His hands, the hands that had taught her to pack clay and trace smoke and read the fall of a tunnel floor, lay still on the blankets. You're teaching, he said. His voice was a whisper. I'm trying. The Lindgren Passage. Fixed. I deepened the trough. Good. He closed his eyes. Water is the enemy. I told you that. You told me many things. Not enough. He opened his eyes again. I should have taught you mortar. I should have taught you stone setting. I should have shown you how to build a chamber that drains itself without digging. You showed me enough. No. Never enough. His hand moved on the blanket, reaching for something, or remembering something. My father built root cellars in Trondheim that lasted 100 years, stone walls, lime floors, channels cut so deep the water never touched the roots. I could have built those here. I meant to build them here, but the work... He coughed, and the sound was wet and wrong. The work takes time, and time is the thing you run out of first. Eliza took his hand. It was cold. You gave me time, she said. You gave my children time. That is enough. August Tollefson died 6 days later in his sleep, with Martha sitting beside him. Eliza did not cry at the burial. She stood at the edge of the grave with Ruth and Owen beside her, watching the dirt fall on the box, and felt something close inside her chest, a door shutting, a passage sealing. She had learned from the dead before, Greeley's tunnel, Greeley's design, Greeley's forgotten work beneath the floor. Now she would carry August's teachings the same way. She would keep them alive by passing them on. She would honor the mentor by becoming what he had been. The earth remembered what shape you asked of it. August had told her that. Now she would ask, and the earth would answer, and the answering would go on long after she was gone. The summer of 1888 brought new students. Word had spread beyond the immediate county, not far, not fast, but enough. A family from the next district came to see the system. Then another. A man from the territorial newspaper rode out to write about the widow who heated her house with earth and air. The article was short and skeptical, but it mentioned her name. Eliza taught them all. She showed them smoke tracing first, the way August had shown her. She taught them to read air movement before they touched a shovel. She taught clay-lime sealing, fall management, drainage principles. She taught them what Greeley had built and what August had fixed, and what she had learned by failing and trying again. Ruth began to help. At 9 years old, the girl had steady hands and sharp eyes. She could trace smoke better than most adults. She could spot a seam that needed sealing from across a chamber. She had grown up with the system, had slept over the warm boards every winter night, had watched her mother crawl into the earth and come back with knowledge. Teach her, August had said once. near the end. She notices, like you noticed. Don't waste that. Eliza did not waste it. By the end of summer, Ruth could explain the basic principles to visitors without her mother's help. By the first frost, she was demonstrating smoke tracing to a neighbor's son, while Eliza worked on a stuck vent 3 miles away. The system was spreading, the knowledge was multiplying, and Harlan Pike was running out of ammunition. The secondary crisis came in October. Not Eliza's system, the system worked. The crisis was elsewhere. A family named Brennan, new to the district, who had tried to build their own chamber without asking for help. They had dug too close to their well. They had not understood drainage. When the autumn rains came, the chamber flooded, the walls collapsed, and the 14-year-old son who had been clearing debris was buried to the waist in mud and broken shoring. The boy survived. His legs did not. Pike seized on the tragedy like a hawk on a rabbit. "The widow's system," he announced at the store, at the church, to anyone who would listen. "The widow's method. She taught people to dig holes, and now a boy will never walk again." It did not matter that Eliza had never met the Brennans. It did not matter that the family had not asked for her help. It did not matter that the failure was caused by ignorance of principles she taught freely to anyone who would learn. What mattered was that Pike had a weapon, and he intended to use it. Eliza rode to the Brennan claim 3 days after the accident. The father met her at the door with a shotgun. "You're not welcome here. I came to see what went wrong." "I know what went wrong. Your system went wrong. Your method went wrong. My son is crippled because of something you taught." "I never taught you anything. I never met you before today." "You taught the district. You spread the idea. You made people think they could dig holes under their houses and play with earth and air like it was safe." His hands were shaking on the shotgun. "It is not safe. My son will never walk again." "I'm sorry about your son. I'm sorry he was hurt. But the system did not hurt him. The system was built wrong. If you let me see it, get off my land." She did not argue. She turned her horse and rode away. But she came back 2 weeks later, after dark, and walked the edge of the collapsed site by lantern light. She could see the mistakes even from the surface. The chamber had been dug too close to standing water. The walls had no shoring. The drainage, if there had been any, ran toward the house instead of away. They had not understood. They had heard about the idea without learning the principles. They had dug a hole and called it a system. And Pike was right, in a way. The idea had spread further than the knowledge. The concept had traveled faster than the teaching. Somewhere in the gap between, "I heard about a tunnel," and "I understand how it works," a boy had lost his legs. Eliza rode home in the dark and did not sleep that night. The next morning she started writing. She had learned to read and write in Ohio, before the frontier, before the claim. She had not used the skill much since. But now she sat at the table with paper and pencil and began to set down everything she knew. Where to dig, how to shore, what to seal, how to trace smoke and manage fall and cut drainage channels that would not fail. What the system could do and what it could not. What mistakes would kill and what mistakes could be fixed. It took her 3 weeks to finish. The result was 12 pages, written small, with diagrams she had drawn herself. It was not elegant, it was not official, but it was complete. She took it to the newspaper office in town. "I want you to print this," she said. The editor looked at the pages. "This is instructions for building underground chambers." "Yes. You want me to print building instructions in a newspaper. I want you to print them so people stop building systems wrong. I want them to have the knowledge before they have the shovel." The editor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Harlan Pike will hate this." "I know. He'll say you're spreading dangerous ideas." "He already says that. At least this way the ideas will be correct." The editor looked at the pages again. He looked at Eliza. He was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and a beard that needed trimming. "I lost a cousin in the January blizzard," he said. "Froze trying to reach his barn. If he'd had something like what you're describing," he trailed off. "I'll print it. 2 issues from now. But I'm running it as information, not endorsement. You understand? I understand. She paid for the printing with money she did not have and walked out into the street. Pike was standing on the boardwalk across the way, watching her. She met his eyes and did not look away. He turned and walked into his store. The article ran in November. By December, 3 more families had built working systems. By January, 2 families who had abandoned their passages during the Pike scare had resumed work and finished. By spring, Eliza had received 4 letters from people she had never met, asking questions about drainage and venting and stone facing. The knowledge was spreading faster than the fear. Pike made one more attempt in February of 1889, when a particularly cold snap tested every system in the district. He walked claim to claim, asking whether the tunnels were holding, hoping to find one that had failed. They all held. Every passage Eliza had helped build. Every chamber she had taught someone to dig. Every vent she had shown someone to seal. The systems worked because the people who built them understood them, and they understood them because she had taken the time to teach. Pike came to her claim last. He stood at the edge of her yard, looking at the cabin, looking at the barn, looking at the small vent pipe that rose near the chimney and breathed warm air into the cold. "You win," he said. Eliza was hauling water. She set down the bucket. "I'm not trying to win anything." "You are. You've been trying to win since the day I told you to sell the cow." Pike's voice was flat, without anger, without edge. "You wanted to prove me wrong. You wanted to prove Amos Bell wrong. You wanted to prove everyone wrong who said a widow couldn't survive a plains winter alone. I wanted to keep my children alive. That too." He looked at her. "My youngest daughter is sick, has been sick since November. Lung fever, the doctor says. The room where she sleeps is the coldest in the house. I have burned 4 cords of wood this winter trying to keep her warm, and the room is still cold." Eliza waited. "My wife wants me to ask you for help." The words seemed to cost him something. "I told her no. I told her I would rather burn the furniture than ask the widow Vale for anything." "And?" "And my daughter is still sick, and my wife is still asking." Pike took a breath. "I need your help." The silence stretched between them. Eliza thought about everything this man had done. The debt he had held over her head, the rumors he had spread, the families he had frightened away from learning, the Brennan boy, crippled in part because Pike's fear-mongering had made people ashamed to ask for instruction. She thought about all of it. Then she picked up the bucket and said, "Show me the room." Pike's house was larger than hers, better built, but poorly designed for heat distribution. The coldest room was in the northeast corner, away from the main chimney, with windows that leaked and walls that sweated in cold snaps. His daughter lay in a bed piled with blankets, coughing the way Owen had coughed during the blizzard. Her face was pale. Her breathing was shallow. "The room needs warmth from below," Eliza said, "but you don't have a barn close enough for a full system. What you need is a heat pocket, a smaller chamber connected to your main cellar, vented through the floor into this corner." "Can it be done?" "It can be done in 2 weeks if you have help. Faster if you do some of the work yourself." Pike looked at his daughter. He looked at his wife standing in the doorway. He looked at Eliza. "I'll dig," he said. They built it together, not as friends, not as allies, but as 2 people who understood that a child's life was worth more than pride. Pike dug where Eliza told him to dig. He sealed where she told him to seal. He asked questions grudgingly, quietly, and listened to the answers. The heat pocket was finished in 11 days. 2 nights later, Pike's wife reported that the room was warmer. A week after that, the daughter's cough began to ease. By March, the girl was sitting up in bed, asking for soup, complaining about being kept inside. Pike never thanked Eliza publicly. He never admitted he had been wrong, but he stopped spreading rumors. He stopped questioning the system. And when someone at the store asked him about the widow's tunnels, he said only, "Ask her yourself. She knows more than I do." It was not conversion. It was not surrender. It was enough. Caleb Morrow arrived in the summer of 1889. He was a widower, 38 years old, with a blacksmith's hands and a carpenter's eye. He had come from Minnesota to file a claim and found that the district already had 3 smiths. What it needed, someone told him, was a man who could work iron fittings for underground vents. Eliza met him at Martha Pinn's place, where he was repairing a hinge. "You're the one who builds the heating systems," he said. "I teach people to build them. There's a difference." "Is there?" He held up the hinge, a simple thing, iron bent at an angle. "I could make a better vent collar than what I've seen in these tunnels. Adjustable. Something that would let you control airflow without crawling down to move a board." "You've looked at the tunnels?" "I've looked at everything. I like to know how things work." He set down the hinge. "I also like to know who makes them work. Martha says that's you." Eliza did not know what to say to that. She had not thought about herself as someone who made things work. She had thought about survival, about teaching, about honoring what August had taught her. "I learned from someone who knew more than I did," she said finally. "Now I pass it on." That's how all knowledge travels. Caleb picked up his hammer. "Would you be willing to show me the original system, the one under your cabin? I have some ideas about the vent design that might make it more efficient." She showed him. He crawled through the tunnel without complaint, examined the chamber with careful attention, and emerged with mud on his elbows and thoughts in his head. "You've maintained this well," he said. "I maintain it every autumn. August taught me to check the seams before first frost." "August Tollefson. You knew him?" "I knew of him. The Norwegian builder. People in Minnesota talked about his root cellars." Caleb wiped his hands on his trousers. "He taught you well, but there are improvements possible, if you're interested." She was interested. Over the following months, Caleb became a regular presence at the claim. He designed an adjustable vent collar that could be turned from above, eliminating the need to crawl below for minor airflow changes. He suggested a secondary cleanout slot that made ice removal faster. He proposed extending a branch passage under the pantry for root storage, an idea August had mentioned but never completed. They built together. They argued about angles and materials. They sat at her table after the children were asleep and drew diagrams on scrap paper. The courtship was slow. Neither of them had married expecting to marry again. But competence builds respect, and respect builds trust, and trust in the right circumstances builds something warmer. They married in the spring of 1890. Ruth stood beside her mother at the ceremony. Owen held the rings. The cat, Juniper, watched from the windowsill of the cabin that had almost killed them and had instead taught them how to live. The years compressed after that. Caleb's improvements spread through the district alongside Eliza's teachings. Adjustable vents appeared in new constructions. Branch passages became common. The original system, Greeley's system, August's system, Eliza's system, evolved into something the whole community understood. Ruth grew into a teacher in her own right. At 14, she demonstrated smoke tracing to visitors without supervision. At 16, she diagnosed a drainage failure at a neighboring claim and directed the repair while Eliza was away. At 18, she married a young farmer who had grown up sleeping over warm boards and never questioned that such a thing was possible. Owen remembered the blizzard only as the night the floor felt alive. He told the story sometimes to his own children later, but the details had softened with time. The fever, the fear, the moment his mother had walked into the storm, these had become family legend, not personal memory. Eliza aged into the role August had once held. Young settlers came to ask her questions before first frost. Neighbors brought their children to see the original chamber, the way people visit historic sites. Someone carved Tollefson Veil Method into a plank above the hatch, and the name stuck. She kept August's knife by the hatch latch. Every autumn she used it to test the clay seams. The handle wore smooth from her grip. The blade stayed sharp. When she died, in the winter of 1912, she was 76 years old. She had lived 45 years on the same claim, in the same cabin, above the same warm boards. Her children buried her beside Caleb, who had gone 3 years before, on a hillside that looked out over land she had saved by refusing to leave it. The cat had died decades earlier, but there had been others, a long line of mousers who slept in the same spot, on the same boards, drawn by warmth they did not need to understand. On January 12, 1888, the temperature had dropped 60 degrees in 8 hours. Amos Bell had stood in her doorway and told her that with 2 children and half a woodpile, she would either leave before January or bury one of them. Eliza Brundage Vale had not left. She had found a dead man's passage, learned a dying man's craft, and turned both into something that outlived them all. The warm grave under the cabin had become a living system, copied and adapted and taught until the original was less important than what it had grown into. On the morning after the blizzard, with her children alive and her hands bloody, and the skeptic standing speechless in her door, she had understood something that took years to put into words. The frontier did not care who survived. It only cared what they left behind. On a night in late autumn, long after the story had ended and begun again in other houses, an old woman sat by a stove that did not need to burn hot because the floor was already warm. A gray cat curled on the boards near the back wall, drawn to a heat that rose from below. The cat had found the warmth first. Eliza was the one who understood what it meant.